Your services at this company are no longer required. Those 9 words hit me like a sudden slap across the face. My stomach dropped as I stared at the polished mahogany conference table I had selected 4 years ago. 19 years of my life building this company from the ground up, and they were dismissing me with a single sentence and blank stares. I looked at each face around the table. These were men I had worked alongside for over a decade, men who would call my personal phone at 3 in the morning when database systems went sideways, knowing I would fix their mistakes. Now, not a single one of them would meet my eyes, except Julian, CEO, Julian Vance, stared directly at me. His face was a smooth mask of corporate indifference, but he could not quite hide the tiny twitch at the corner of his mouth. It was a look of pure satisfaction. The man was enjoying this. My name is Valerie Coleman. I am 56 years old, and until 11:20 in the morning, on that Tuesday, I was the Chief Operating Officer of Meridian Healthcare Solutions. We have decided to take the company in a different direction, Julian continued, his voice carrying that practiced authority that had once impressed me but now sounded entirely hollow. Bryce will be stepping into your role. Effective immediately, Bryce Rollins, Julian's son-in-law, who had been with our company for a grand total of 9 months. This was the same Bryce who had sat in my office just last week, leaning back in his chair and asking me what the federal health insurance portability laws actually represented. The same Bryce who had been handed a vice president title the day after he married Julian's daughter, Chloe Vance. I see was all I could manage to say. My own voice sounded thin and distant. And when exactly did the board vote on this decision? I looked pointedly at Gerald Foster, our chief financial officer. Just yesterday, Gerald had texted me about our usual afternoon coffee ritual. Now, Gerald suddenly found his leather-bound notepad absolutely fascinating, tracing the lines of his pen with intense focus. It was decided last night, Julian said. An emergency session of the board. An emergency session that had been kept completely hidden from me. A secret meeting where they voted to replace me with a 40-year-old former hedge fund associate whose greatest achievement in life was marrying the CEO's daughter. Human Resources has prepared your separation package, Julian said, sliding a thick manila envelope across the dark wood. I think you will find the terms quite generous. We are not monsters, Valerie. No, monsters would at least have the courage to be honest. I did not touch the envelope. I let it sit there on the mahogany surface. 19 years, I said, my voice quiet but steady. I was here when we had only 23 employees working out of that warehouse in Somerville. I personally negotiated and signed our very first hospital network contract. I flew to Singapore with a high fever to rescue the Eastwood deal. The conference room grew silent. I could almost taste their collective guilt, something bitter and metallic hanging in the air. We appreciate your past contributions, Julian said mechanically, but Meridian needs fresh perspectives now. What he really meant was that Chloe wanted her husband in a corner office and my influence threatened his control. I stood up, my legs surprisingly stable. I will clear out my office. There is no need to rush, Julian said, offering a patronizing smile. Take the rest of the day. Security will assist you, security escort, as if I might steal proprietary code, as if I had not poured my entire life into this company. I had sacrificed weekends, holidays, and personal relationships that withered away because I was always at the office. My entire identity had become Meridian. And now, they were escorting me out of the building like a common thief. I walked back to my office under the curious stares of my team. Already I could feel people pulling away, calculating their survival in a company suddenly run by Bryce. I grabbed an empty cardboard box and began the humiliating process of packing 19 years of my life into a single container. My leadership awards, the nameplate from my door, and the small jade plant on my windowsill that my mother had given me. Audrey Miller, my assistant for the last 8 years, stood in the doorway, her eyes red. They already asked me to work for Bryce, she whispered, adding that they were already blaming me for cost overruns. Take the job, Audrey, I said, managing a steady voice. You have medical bills to pay. But do not give him my files without a formal digital request through information technology. After Audrey left, my phone rang. It was Regina Thorne, the CEO of Apex Medical Networks, our fiercest competitor. Valerie, she said, her voice sharp and direct. I heard what happened. Meridian just made the dumbest decision in their history. Meet me at the Langham Tea Lounge at 6 in the evening. Come alone, and let us discuss how to turn this betrayal into your greatest victory. The line went dead. I sat back in my chair, looking at the jade plant just as my phone buzzed with a message from security, giving me 25 minutes to leave. The anger inside me began to harden into something cold, sharp, and dangerous. Julian Vance had always underestimated me. He saw me as a reliable workhorse who would quietly accept the blow. He had never seen the steel underneath. I picked up the box, stood tall, and prepared to leave. I sat in my sensible sedan, gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. The tears came then, hot and furious, blurring the gray outline of the corporate campus I had entered every morning for nearly 2 decades. I let myself feel the raw grief of the betrayal for exactly 10 minutes. Then I wiped my face, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, and applied a fresh layer of red lipstick. I was not defeated. I was simply changing my strategy. The Langham Tea Lounge was quiet. When I arrived just before 6 in the evening, its classic wood paneling and low lighting, offering a soothing contrast to the glass and steel architecture of the Meridian headquarters. Regina Thorne was already seated in a secluded corner booth. At 68 years old, she carried herself with the effortless authority of a woman who had never felt the need to apologize for her ambition. Her silver-streaked hair was cut in a precise bob, framing eyes that were sharp and intensely analytical. She stood up to shake my hand as I approached. "Thank you for coming, Valerie," she said, her grip firm and brief. I took the seat across the table from Regina. I was curious, I admitted, and frankly, my calendar cleared up unexpectedly this morning. Regina smiled, a quick, sharp expression. "Let us order some tea, and then we can discuss how Julian Vance just handed me the competitive advantage I have been seeking for several years." Once the server had poured our tea, Regina leaned forward, resting her forearms on the table. "I have watched your career closely, Valerie. You built Meridian's operational foundation. You established their clinical networks, created their compliance protocols, and maintained their most critical client relationships. You are the engine of that company, not Julian, and certainly not that board of passive directors." "Apparently, the board disagreed," I said, trying to keep the bitter edge out of my voice. "They seem to think a former hedge fund associate with 9 months of industry experience is a suitable replacement." "Julian is a short-sighted fool," Regina said with quiet contempt. "He has always let his ego override his business judgment, but his foolishness is our opportunity. I want you to join Apex, Valerie. I am offering you a full partnership, a significant equity stake, and a seat on our board of directors. You will have the freedom to build and innovate without Julian second-guessing your every decision." I stared at her, stunned by the scale of the offer. A partnership at Apex was a massive proposition, but my 19 years in the corporate arena had made me naturally cautious. "Why would you offer me so much?" I asked. "I have been your primary competitor. For all you know, I could be a Trojan horse sent to gather intelligence." Regina laughed. A warm, genuine sound. "Julian does not have the imagination for that kind of corporate strategy. Besides, I see the look in your eyes. It is the look of a woman who has worked twice as hard as her male peers to receive half the credit. It is the look of someone who has reached her absolute limit." "I know that feeling because I lived it." She set her cup down. "We both know the real reason you were pushed out, Valerie. It was not just about nepotism. It was about the Lindale Group acquisition." I froze. The Lindale deal was Julian's obsession, a proposed $3,500,000,000 acquisition of a prescription management system. "Julian plans to announce the deal next month," Regina continued. "But Lindale's system is a compliance nightmare. They have massive security flaws and potential federal health privacy violations throughout their platform. You would have found those issues during the final due diligence process and refused to sign off on the transaction. Julian knew he could not bully you into silence, so he removed you before you could inspect the code. The revelation made the pieces fall into place. Julian had sacrificed my position to protect a reckless, multi-billion-dollar deal that would boost his ego. "What about my non-compete agreement?" I asked. "It restricts me from working for a direct competitor for 18 months. "Our legal team has already analyzed your contract," Regina replied. Meridian's agreement can prevent you from taking an official executive role with us for 18 months, and it prohibits you from soliciting their employees. However, it cannot legally restrict you from operating as an independent consultant for third-party entities, and it certainly cannot prevent you from consulting for Meridian's clients. She leaned back, watching my reaction. The Mayo Clinic contract renewal is coming up in 4 months. It is currently worth $58 million annually to Meridian. You built that relationship from scratch. You know their clinical directors, their technical requirements, and their administrative pain points. If Mayo Clinic decides to hire you as an independent consultant to evaluate their technology vendors, that does not violate your non-compete, Regina explained. And if your analysis leads them to realize that Apex offers a more secure, compliant platform than Meridian, that is simply fair competition. I took a slow sip of my tea, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. The plan was elegant, legally sound, and devastating. I need some time to process this, I said. It is a major transition. Take 72 hours, Regina said, sliding a heavy business card across the table. But remember, your market value is highest right now, while your knowledge of their operational weaknesses is fresh. Let us correct this injustice together. I took the card, feeling the heavy paper between my fingers. The corporate landscape was about to change, and Julian Vance had no idea what was coming. I spent the next 2 days walking along the Charles River, letting the cool breeze clear my head. Across the water, the glass tower of the Meridian headquarters stood tall, its windows reflecting the gray sky. For 19 years, I had poured my energy into that building, believing that loyalty and hard work were the currency of success. I had been wrong. In the corporate world, the currency was power, and I had allowed myself to be disarmed. On the third afternoon, my phone rang. The screen displayed a name that made my heart beat faster. Dr. Miriam Hendersons, the chief medical officer at Mayo Clinic. Valerie, Miriam said, her voice warm and filled with concern. I just heard the news. Are you all right? Miriam and I had worked together for nearly 10 years. We had spent long nights troubleshooting database migrations, traded recommendations for mystery novels, and celebrated when her eldest daughter was accepted into medical school. Our relationship had grown far beyond a standard client-vendor connection. I am taking some time to plan my next steps, I said, keeping my tone calm. How did you hear? Julian Vance called me personally this morning, Miriam said, a dry edge to her voice. He wanted to assure us that the transition would be seamless, and that his son-in-law, Bryce, would be managing our account personally. I told him we would need to review our options before proceeding with the contract renewal. She paused, and I could hear the determination in her voice. Valerie, we did not choose Meridian because of the logo on the letterhead. We chose them because of you. We trust your operational oversight, your honesty when systems fail, and your commitment to patient data security. Now that you are gone, the board expects us to trust a man who has never managed a clinical network in his life. That means more than I can say, Miriam, I replied. It is not just sentiment, Valerie. The formal vendor evaluation process for our $58 million contract begins in 4 months. We would value your independent insights as a consultant to help us assess our technology options. It was a direct invitation, delivered with perfect professional discretion. I am establishing an independent consulting firm next week, I explained to Miriam. I would be honored to assist Mayo Clinic with the evaluation. Excellent, Miriam said. My assistant will reach out to schedule our first meeting. Take care of yourself, Valerie. Their loss is going to be someone else's gain. After we hung up, the last lingering doubts disappeared. The path forward was clear. The next morning, I walked into Regina Thorne's office at Apex and signed the partnership agreement. By that afternoon, I had secured a new office space in a building in Cambridge. The office was located on the upper floors, offering a direct view across the river to Julian Vance's corner office. It was a silent daily reminder of my presence. I formally launched my independent consulting practice, structuring the business with the help of Regina's legal experts to ensure we remained strictly within the boundaries of my 18-month non-compete agreement. My very first client was Mayo Clinic, and my initial assignment was to analyze their current healthcare management system and compare it with competing platforms. 4. Days after my termination, my phone buzzed with a text message from Audrey Miller, who had reluctantly remained at Meridian as Bryce's assistant. "Bryce cannot find the Westlake integration files," the message read. "He has a board presentation in an hour and is panicking. Julian is furious." I smiled as I read the text. I had not deleted or hidden any files. The Westlake documentation was exactly where it belonged, stored under the acquisition folder in our shared database. But Bryce did not have the institutional knowledge to navigate the complex filing system I had spent 19 years building. He did not understand the logic of our operations. Without my mental map, the digital archive was a labyrinth he could not hope to solve. I did not reply to Audrey. I simply laid my phone on the desk and returned to my work. I had spent years acting as the shock absorber for the company, quietly resolving crises before they reached Julian's desk. Now the company would have to operate without its engine. Within 2 weeks, Audrey texted me again. "We lost the Harborview Hospital account today," she wrote. "The chief financial officer is in a panic." Harborview had been wavering for over 6 months due to service delays. I had spent dozens of hours on the phone with their procurement directors, listening to their complaints and personally ensuring their issues were resolved. Without my constant attention and the trust I had established, the account had collapsed. I was not actively poaching Meridian's clients. I did not need to do so. The relationships had always been personal, built on trust in my execution rather than the corporate brand. Without my stewardship, the foundation was beginning to crumble. Meanwhile, my work at Apex was moving forward rapidly. Regina kept every promise she had made. I had complete operational autonomy, substantial resources, and a team that respected my expertise. I began recruiting 4 key senior analysts from Meridian who had been undervalued by Julian's management team, carefully timing their transitions to avoid any non-solicitation violations. Together, we began building a modern, secure client management platform that integrated the best operational practices I had developed over 19 years. We were creating the system I had always wanted to build at Meridian, a platform free from the constraints of Julian's vanity and short-sighted budget cuts. The momentum was shifting, and I could feel the current pulling us toward victory. Our legal strategy required absolute precision. To execute our plan, I worked closely with Regina Thorne's lead corporate attorney to prepare our primary weapon, a comprehensive shareholder derivative lawsuit based on a clear breach of fiduciary duty. Under corporate law, directors and officers owe 2 fundamental duties to their shareholders: the duty of care and the duty of loyalty. Julian Vance and the board of directors had systematically violated both. Our legal team was meticulous, citing specific case law regarding the duty of loyalty, which demands that corporate officers and directors act in good faith and in the best interests of the corporation. The complaint detailed how Julian Vance had systematically put his personal interest in enriching his son-in-law above the financial well-being of Meridian and its shareholders. We alleged that the board's rubber stamping of Bryce Rollins' appointment without any search process constituted a severe breach of their duty of care. This legal pressure would force them to account for every backroom decision they had made. First, they had engaged in clear self-dealing by appointing Bryce Rollins, an unqualified family member with only 9 months of experience, to the role of Chief Operating Officer. This decision was made without any formal search process, without evaluating competing candidates, and without considering the best interests of the corporation. It was a direct violation of the duty of loyalty, prioritizing Julian's family obligations over shareholder value. Second, they had violated the duty of care by failing to conduct reasonable due diligence regarding the Lindale Group acquisition. Julian had actively suppressed my warnings about Lindale's compliance failures and had hidden the emergency board meeting where my termination was decided. By pushing for a $3.5 billion transaction despite knowing of potential health privacy violations, the board was exposing the company to catastrophic regulatory fines and reputational ruin. As a significant shareholder who held a substantial block of Meridian stock accumulated over 19 years, I had the legal standing to bring a derivative action on behalf of the company. We drafted a detailed complaint documenting the board's failures, their self-dealing, and their reckless disregard for compliance warnings. The lawsuit would force Julian and the board to justify their decisions in open court, exposing their private communications and board minutes to public scrutiny. The lawsuit itself was a masterpiece of legal strategy. We did not merely file a simple claim, we submitted a detailed ledger of Julian's conflicts of interest. The local business journals immediately picked up the story, and the headlines were devastating for Meridian's public image. My attorneys had prepared for this moment for weeks, ensuring that the legal arguments were ironclad and that the evidence of self-dealing was clear. Julian was used to corporate battles, but he was completely unprepared for a lawsuit that targeted his personal greed so directly. The board was in a panic, calling emergency sessions to discuss their potential personal liability. While our legal team finalized the complaint, the operational consequences of my departure continued to accelerate. The loss of the Harborview account was merely the beginning of the slide. Without my oversight, Meridian's day-to-day operations were falling into disarray. Tech support response times doubled, integration projects fell behind schedule, and client satisfaction scores plummeted. Bryce Rollins was quickly proving to be entirely out of his depth. He tried to manage the operations using spreadsheets and financial models he had used during his hedge fund days, completely ignoring the clinical and human elements of healthcare technology. He treated our hospital clients as mere numbers on a balance sheet, alienating directors who had expected personal attention and operational transparency. At Apex, my team of 4 analysts was working to finalize our technology proposal for Mayo Clinic. We spent weeks analyzing Mayo's workflow, identifying inefficiencies in their current Meridian installation, and demonstrating how the Apex platform could resolve their compliance risks. We did not need to attack Meridian's software. We simply presented a superior, more secure alternative backed by a team that understood their clinical needs. I led the presentation to Mayo's evaluation committee myself. When I walked into the conference room, I was met with warm smiles and firm handshakes from people I had known for a decade. They were frustrated by the recent service issues at Meridian and the lack of communication from Bryce Rollins. They wanted stability, security, and expertise, and we offered them all three. During the meeting, I explained the legal implications of the upcoming health privacy regulations, showing how the Apex architecture was built to handle the new compliance standards. I demonstrated how our system prevented the exact data vulnerability risks that were currently threatening the Lindale acquisition. The committee members took detailed notes, their nods indicating their agreement. By the end of the month, we had also secured 3 mid-size hospital networks that had been on Meridian's prospect list for years. These clients had been hesitant to sign with Meridian due to Julian's aggressive sales tactics and lack of operational detail. Our new client-centered approach, combined with the reputation I had established over 19 years, convinced them to choose Apex instead. 3 days after the lawsuit was filed, my personal phone rang late in the evening. The caller identification showed Julian Vance's name. I let it ring for several seconds, savoring the moment, before sliding the screen to answer. "Valerie Coleman," I said calmly. "Valerie," Julian said, his voice tense and stripped of its usual corporate bravado. "We need to talk. I think this situation has escalated beyond what is reasonable for business. You chose to make it personal when you escorted me out of the building with security." "Julian," I replied, "I am simply pursuing my legal rights as a shareholder." "The board has been discussing the lawsuit," Julian said, trying to adopt a conciliatory tone. "We believe there has been a misunderstanding. We are prepared to offer you a position as a senior advisor to the board. We can discuss a highly competitive compensation package, including additional stock options." "A senior advisor," I repeated, letting a soft laugh escape. "You want me to return and quiet the shareholders while your son-in-law continues to destroy the operations I built." "We can restructure Bright's responsibilities," Julian pressed, his frustration showing. "The company needs your institutional knowledge to manage the client renewals." "We can reach an agreement, Valerie." "Name your terms. My terms are already written in the Chancery Court complaint, Julian," I said. "You breached your fiduciary duties to this company. You appointed an unqualified relative to a critical operational role, and you pursued a multi-billion-dollar acquisition while ignoring catastrophic compliance risks. I want the shareholders to see the truth. You are trying to destroy the company you helped build." Julian snapped, his anger finally breaking through. "No," I replied. "I am letting the natural consequences of your decisions unfold. You believed I was disposable, Julian. You believed you could replace 19 years of execution with family connections. Now you are learning that the value was never in the logo on the building. It was in the work." The line went silent for a moment. "This is not over," Julian said quietly. "Our legal team will fight this suit. Your legal team will have to explain the board minutes under oath, Julian," I said. "Good luck with that." I hung up before he could respond, feeling a deep sense of peace. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The collapse of the Meridian Empire happened faster than I had anticipated. The following morning, the state chancery court denied the board's motion to dismiss our lawsuit, clearing the way for immediate document discovery. 2 days later, Audrey Miller sent me a text message. "The Lindale acquisition is dead," she wrote. "The board found the security issues and canceled the transaction. Julian is in crisis. Without my presence to suppress the warnings, the external audit team had uncovered the compliance failures in the Lindale system. The board had no choice but to terminate the deal to avoid regulatory prosecution." Julian's legacy-defining transaction had collapsed under the weight of his own negligence. That afternoon, Gerald Foster sent me an email from his personal account. The subject line was simply, "You were right." Attached was a copy of the confidential board minutes from the weeks leading up to my termination, proving that Julian had planned to replace me with Brice Rollins long before the emergency board meeting. Gerald had finally decided to protect his own reputation by cooperating with our legal team. The final blow came when Mayo Clinic announced their vendor decision. They officially terminated their relationship with Meridian and awarded their $65 million healthcare management contract to Apex. The announcement cited our superior compliance architecture and operational expertise as the key factors. On the news of the Mayo loss and the collapse of the Lindale deal, Meridian's stock plunged by 31% in a single day. The financial press began questioning Julian's leadership, and an anonymous source leaked the details of the compliance failures to the technology news websites. Faced with a declining stock price, a major shareholder lawsuit, and a mutiny among the remaining board members, Julian Vance was forced to resign as chief executive officer. Brice Rollins was terminated from his role as chief operating officer the same afternoon. I stood at my window in the Cambridge office, holding a mug of coffee and watching the Meridian Tower across the river. The lights in the corner office were dark. Audrey Miller texted me one final time. "Julian and Brice are packing their boxes. The board is looking for a new chief executive officer." I smiled and set my mug down. I had not destroyed the company. I had simply stopped holding it together, allowing their own incompetence to complete the work. My phone buzzed with an incoming email from Regina Thorne. The Mayo Clinic contract was finalized, awaiting my signature as partner. I sat at my desk, signed the document, and looked out at the river. The future was bright, built on a foundation of my own creation. "Goodbye, Julian," I thought. "Your services are no longer required."